The air in the marina was thick with the scent of salt, diesel, and the slow decay of wood. It was a smell Alex had come to associate with peace, a kind of stagnant tranquility that mirrored his own life. For 2 years, his world had been the 50-foot hull of the Wanderer, a classic sailboat he was restoring with the same meticulous patience he had once applied to human arteries. He sanded the teak deck, his hands, once steady enough to suture a beating heart, now covered in a fine layer of sawdust. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted not by what he had lost, but by what he had been. He had been Dr. Alex Sterling, a prodigy in cardiothoracic surgery, a name whispered with reverence in the halls of Boston General. He had hands that could dance through the delicate architecture of the human chest, a mind that saw 3 steps ahead of any complication. He had a penthouse overlooking the Charles River, a collection of tailored suits, and a future that seemed as gleaming and solid as the steel of his surgical instruments. Now he had calluses, worn-out jeans, and the quiet company of gulls. The transition had been less of a fall, and more of a deliberate quiet step off a cliff. The past was a locked room, and he rarely touched the handle. He had walked away after losing a 7-year-old girl on his table. It was not his fault. The inquest had been clear on that. A faulty heart-lung machine, a piece of equipment he had flagged for replacement for months, had failed at the critical moment. But the child's face, pale and still under the harsh operating lights, had become the new wallpaper of his mind. The system had failed her, but his hands had been the last to touch her. The guilt was an anchor, and he had willingly tied it to his own feet, so he left. He cashed out, bought the boat, and began the slow, pointless work of sanding away his own history. His stasis was comfortable, a self-imposed exile that demanded nothing of him until Isabella found him. She had been a part of that old life, a gallery owner with sharp eyes, and a sharper ambition that had once fascinated him. A text message appeared one afternoon, a ghost from a world he had buried. "I'm in town. Dinner for old time's sake." He should have said no. He should have dropped his phone into the murky water of the harbor. But a flicker of the old Alex, the one who craved connection, answered for him. The restaurant was a world away from his marina. It was all low lighting, white linen, and the hushed clink of expensive silverware. Isabella looked exactly the same, sculpted and elegant, her smile as curated as the art in her gallery. She was with a man named Julian, a tech mogul with a confident handshake and an expensive watch. The conversation was a minefield of polite inquiries about Alex's life, questions he deflected with vague answers about taking time off and working on a project. A boat? Julian had asked, his interest feigned but polite. Sailing, then? The Caribbean? Just restoring it, Alex had replied, the words feeling small and insignificant in the opulent room. It's a lot of work. Isabella had watched him, her head tilted with a look that was a careful blend of pity and affection. She had loved the surgeon, the rising star. The man covered in sawdust was a stranger to her. A curiosity as they parted ways on the sidewalk, under the glow of a gas lamp. She had placed a cool hand on his arm. Julian was a few feet away, checking his phone. "It was good to see you, Alex. Really," she said, her voice soft. He knew what was coming next. The gentle dismissal, the final closing of a chapter. "You know," she continued, her eyes scanning his face, taking in the sun-weathered skin and the weariness that had settled deep in his bones. "It's okay. We all have a peak, a moment when everything is perfect. Yours was just spectacular. You saved so many people. You can't be that person forever. No one can." But the words landed like a verdict. You peaked. It was not a statement about his past. It was a judgment on his future. She was telling him his story was over. The best parts had already been written, and all that was left was a quiet, unremarkable epilogue spent in a dusty marina. He had nodded, managed a tight smile, and walked away, the sound of her heels clicking on the pavement like a final closing door. The words followed him through the city streets. You peaked. He walked for hours, the polished facade of downtown giving way to the grit of the industrial district, and then to the worn-down familiarity of the neighborhoods clinging to the city's edge. This was where he had grown up, a world of cracked pavement and chain-link fences, a place where ambulances sometimes took too long to arrive. He found himself standing on a corner he hadn't seen in 20 years. Outside a boarded-up storefront that used to be a bakery, a small makeshift memorial of withered flowers and teddy bears was propped against the wall. He leaned closer, reading the faded name on a cardboard sign, Marco, age 62, died waiting. The words were a punch to the gut. Nothing had changed. It was then that he heard the panicked shouts. A woman's voice, sharp with fear. "Please! Somebody help! He can't breathe." He turned and saw her, a young woman struggling with a small boy who was gasping for air, his small body rigid with effort. His face was pale, his lips tinged with blue. Alex didn't think. The ghost of Dr. Sterling moved for him. "I'm a doctor," he said, his voice rusty but firm. The woman, her eyes wide with terror, looked at him, at his rough clothes and calloused hands. Doubt flickered in her eyes, but the desperation was stronger. "Please," she whispered. He knelt, his mind instantly clearing. The fog of the past 2 years burned away by the searing heat of crisis. "Asthma?" he asked, his hands already gently checking the boy's pulse. It was thready and fast. "Yes, he has an inhaler, but it's not working," she sobbed. The boy's breathing was shallow, a high-pitched wheeze that signaled a severe bronchospasm. The nearest hospital was 15 minutes away, too long. The local urgent care clinic was dark, a sign on the door listing its limited hours. Alex looked at the boy, then at the mother. He made a choice. He was no longer a man sanding a boat. He was a doctor. "Lay him down. Keep him calm," he commanded, his voice imbued with an authority he hadn't used in years. He ran a hand over the boy's chest, feeling the frantic struggle of his intercostal muscles. He thought about the physiology, the cascade of inflammation. He needed to open the airways. Now he looked around, his mind racing, cataloging the environment. A 24-hour pharmacy, 3 blocks down. "I'll be right back." "Do not move him," he told the mother, locking eyes with her. "My name is Alex. What's his name?" "Leo," she choked out. "I'm Sarah." "I'll be back for Leo," he promised, and then he ran. He sprinted down the street, his legs burning, his heart pounding with a purpose it hadn't felt in years. He didn't just need an inhaler. He needed a nebulizer, epinephrine if he could get it. He burst into the pharmacy, a wild-eyed man in a dusty t-shirt. He didn't have a prescription. He didn't have his credentials. He had only the sheer force of his will. He explained the situation to the skeptical pharmacist, using precise medical terminology, describing the boy's condition, with a chilling clarity that cut through the man's doubt. He paid in cash, grabbing the portable nebulizer and the vials of albuterol. When he got back, Leo was fading. Sarah was crying, holding his small hand. Alex didn't hesitate. He ripped open the packaging, assembled the nebulizer with practiced speed, and fitted the small mask over Leo's face. The machine hissed to life, pumping a fine mist of medicine into the boy's struggling lungs. For a long minute nothing happened. The wheezing continued, a terrible, thin sound in the quiet night. Alex monitored his pulse, his hand on the boy's neck. "Come on, Leo," he whispered, the words a prayer. Then, slowly, miraculously, the rigid muscles in the boy's chest began to soften. The wheezing lessened, replaced by a deep, rattling cough. A moment later, Leo took a shuddering deep breath, then another. Color began to return to his face. He opened his eyes, dazed and exhausted, and looked at his mother. Sarah let out a sob of pure relief, collapsing against Alex. "Thank you," she said, the words muffled against his shoulder. "Oh, God, thank you." Alex held the boy's small hand, feeling the steady, stronger pulse beneath his fingertips. He looked at the closed clinic across the street, at the memorial for the man who died waiting. He looked at Sarah's tear-streaked, grateful face. and he heard Isabella's voice in his head one last time. You peaked. A cold fire ignited in his chest. She was wrong. He hadn't peaked. He had just been sleeping, and he had just woken up. The next day, Alex returned to the neighborhood. The encounter with Sarah and Leo had unsettled something deep within him, shaking the foundations of his quiet exile. He found the storefront he had seen the night before, the one that had once been a bakery. It was for rent. Peering through the grimy windows, he saw not a dusty, empty space, but a waiting room. He saw an examination table, a cabinet full of supplies. He saw a place where a boy like Leo wouldn't have to struggle for breath on a cold sidewalk. The idea was insane. He was a surgeon, not a general practitioner. He had no license to practice in this state, no staff, no insurance. He had only a formidable savings account and a simmering rage against a system that left people like Sarah and Leo vulnerable. That rage, he realized, was a cleaner, more potent fuel than the guilt he had been running on for 2 years. He made a call to a lawyer, a man who owed him a favor from his old life. The legal hurdles were immense, but not insurmountable. He could work as a consultant, a director, and hire licensed physicians to practice under him. He spent a week making calls, pulling on threads from his past that he thought were long since severed. He found a doctor nearing retirement who was willing to work part-time, a nurse who had grown up in the neighborhood and was tired of the bureaucratic bloat of the city hospitals. He rented the storefront. The first few weeks were a blur of manual labor. He tore out the old counters, scrubbed the floors, and painted the walls a clean, hopeful white. He used his own hands, the same hands that had sanded the boat, to build something new. Each swing of the hammer felt like an argument against Isabella's words. Each coat of paint was an act of defiance. Sarah found him there one afternoon, a cloud of plaster dust hanging in the air around him. She had brought him a cup of coffee. Leo was with her, clutching a new inhaler and looking at Alex with wide, reverent eyes. "What is all this?" Sarah asked, her gaze sweeping over the chaotic, hopeful mess. "A clinic," Alex said simply, wiping sweat from his forehead. "A small one. Free. For anyone who needs it." Sarah stared at him, her expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief, and then to a profound, quiet understanding. "Because of Leo?" "Because of Marco," Alex corrected gently, nodding toward the faded memorial across the street. "And Leo?" "And everyone else." From that day on, Sarah was a constant presence. She had no medical training, but she had a fierce organizational skill and a deep connection to the community. She became his volunteer manager, his conscience, his first true believer. She canvassed the neighborhood, telling people about the new clinic. She organized a donation drive for old furniture and office supplies. She was the heart of the operation before it even had a pulse. Leo became his shadow. The boy was fascinated by the medical equipment Alex began to purchase. He would sit for hours watching Alex unbox a stethoscope or an otoscope, asking endless, insightful questions. "Is this for looking at ears?" he'd ask. "Why does blood need to be red?" His innocence was a balm, washing away the cynicism that had crusted over Alex's spirit. He wasn't Dr. Sterling, the surgical prodigy to Leo. He was just Alex, the man who had helped him breathe. The clinic opened on a gray Tuesday in October. They had one doctor, one nurse, and Sarah at the front desk. The waiting room was a collection of mismatched chairs. The equipment was used, but functional. Alex had named it the Northwood Community Clinic, a simple, unassuming name for a radical idea. The first day, only 3 patients came. An elderly man with arthritis, a young mother with a feverish baby, and a construction worker with a deep gash on his arm. Alex watched from his small office in the back, a space that was little more than a closet. He watched the retired Dr. Samuel treat the patients with a gentle, unhurried kindness that was impossible in the 15-minute slots of a corporate medical practice. He watched Sarah soothe the crying baby while her mother filled out paperwork. He felt a sense of ownership, of terrifying responsibility, that was more real than any penthouse he had ever owned. Word spread slowly. then all at once. The clinic was clean, the staff was kind, and it was free. People came, at first, tentatively, then, in a steady stream. They were the uninsured, the underinsured, the undocumented, the people who fell through the cracks of a fractured system. Alex worked in the background, managing supplies, securing funding from small local grants, and using his own money to fill the gaps. He was the foundation, the unseen structure that held it all up. One evening, long after the last patient had gone home, he and Sarah were cleaning up, the scent of antiseptic hanging in the air. The small clinic was quiet, a sanctuary against the cold night. "Why did you really do it?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. "Leave your old life, I mean. It wasn't just burnout, was it?" Alex stopped wiping down the counter and looked at her. Her gaze was direct, not with judgment, but with a genuine desire to understand the man who had appeared out of nowhere and changed her world. He found himself wanting to tell her, needing to give voice to the ghost that had followed him for so long. He leaned against the wall, the weariness of the day settling on him. "I was a surgeon," he began, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "A cardiothoracic surgeon. I lost a patient, a little girl. Her name was Lily." He told her everything. He described the frantic moments in the operating room, the sudden, catastrophic failure of the machine, the horrifying silence when the monitors flatlined. He told her about the inquest, the lawyers, the hospital administrators, who offered condolences while quietly covering their own liability. He told her how he saw Lily's face in every crowd, how her parents' silent, accusing grief had broken something inside him. "I couldn't cut people open anymore," he finished, his voice raw. "My hands felt unclean. I felt like a fraud. So I left. I thought, if I just stopped, if I hid, I couldn't hurt anyone else." Sarah listened, her expression never wavering. She didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. When he was done, she simply walked over to him and placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm and steady. "You didn't fail her, Alex," she said quietly. "The system did. The hospital did. What you're doing here, this is the opposite of hiding. This is fighting back." In that moment, a piece of the anger he had been dragging for 2 years crumbled away. Her acceptance was a gift, a quiet absolution. He hadn't known he was so desperate for. He realized his connection to her, and to Leo had become the new scaffolding around his hollowed-out life. He was building the clinic for the community, but he was also rebuilding himself, one patient, one small act of service, at a time. The work was exhausting, the hours brutal. But for the first time in years, he went to sleep with a sense of purpose and woke up with a reason to get out of bed. The ghost of Dr. Sterling was fading, replaced by the solid, tangible reality of Alex, the director of the Northwood Clinic. The clinic's success did not go unnoticed. A small feature in a local newspaper, celebrating the grassroots effort, brought a wave of positive attention and a much-needed increase in donations. It also brought a far more dangerous kind of attention. One afternoon, a sleek, black town car, incongruous against the neighborhood's gritty backdrop, pulled up to the curb. A man in a suit that cost more than the clinic's monthly rent stepped out. He introduced himself as Marcus Thorne, the chief executive officer of OmniHealth, the massive private hospital conglomerate whose gleaming glass tower dominated the city skyline. Thorne was a man who radiated a predatory polish, his smile all sharp edges and veiled condescension. He asked for a tour, his eyes scanning the clinic's humble interior, not with admiration, but with the cold calculus of a rival. "Impressive," Thorne said, his tone suggesting the opposite, as they stood in Alex's cramped office. "A real passion project. You're Dr. Alex Sterling, aren't you, the Boston general surgeon? I remember the name. Quite the phenom." A chill went down Alex's spine. "I'm just the director here," Alex said, keeping his voice neutral. "Of course," Thorne said, his smile widening. He sat down, uninvited, in the only other chair in the room. "Look, Sterling, I'll be direct. Your little clinic is becoming a nuisance. Every patient you treat for free is a patient not paying for an emergency room visit at my hospital a mile away. It's a drain on our revenue stream. People here can't afford your emergency room, Alex countered, his anger beginning to simmer. We're providing a service you've chosen to ignore. Charity is a noble sentiment, but a terrible business model, Thorne said smoothly, which is why I'm here to make you an offer. OmniHealth wants to acquire your clinic. We'll absorb it into our corporate foundation. You'll get a new building, better equipment, a real budget. We'll even put your name on it. The Sterling Center for Community Health has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Alex saw the trap immediately. His clinic would become a PR tool for OmniHealth, a way for them to feign community involvement while continuing to price gouge the sick. The spirit of the place, its independence and its soul, would be crushed under the weight of corporate bureaucracy. The clinic is not for sale, Alex said, his voice cold. Thorne's smile vanished. The polished mask dropped, revealing the ruthless predator beneath. I did some digging on you, Sterling. The inquest into the death of Lily Miller, the subsequent lawsuit the parents filed. You were cleared, of course. But cleared is a messy word. To the public, it sounds a lot like got away with it. It would be a shame if the story of a disgraced surgeon running an under-equipped clinic in a poor neighborhood were to find its way to the press. A real tragedy for the people you're trying to help. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. This was the moment of no return. Thorne was not just threatening the clinic, he was threatening to resurrect the ghost of Lily, to twist Alex's greatest pain into a weapon against him. Get out, Alex said, his voice dangerously quiet. Thorne stood, smoothing his suit jacket. The offer stands for 48 hours. After that, well, the news cycle is always hungry for a story about a fallen hero. Think about what's best for the community, Doctor. After Thorne left, Alex stood in his office, the silence ringing in his ears. The old fear, the one he had tried to bury at the bottom of the harbor, resurfaced with a vengeance. He had built this place to honor Lily's memory, to create something good from his failure. Now, Thorne was threatening to desecrate that memory, to use it to destroy the very thing he had built. He could not go back to hiding, but he wasn't sure he had the strength to fight a man like Thorne, a man who wielded power like a scalpel, with no regard for the wounds he inflicted. The walls of the clinic, once a symbol of hope, suddenly felt like they were closing in. The blow came 2 days later, swift and brutal. An article appeared on the website of a major city newspaper, its headline sensational and cruel. Disgraced surgeon's charity clinic under scrutiny. The piece was a masterful blend of half-truths and insidious implications, painting Alex as a reckless doctor with a troubled past, operating a rogue facility that preyed on the vulnerable. It mentioned Lily Miller by name, twisting the tragedy into a narrative of his incompetence. It was Thorne's work, precise and devastating. The fallout was immediate. The phones, which usually rang with appointment requests, now rang with cancellations and angry questions. A local news van parked across the street, its camera a malevolent eye. Donations, the lifeblood of the clinic, dried up overnight. The community's trust, so hard-won, began to fray. Parents who had once brought their children to him with gratitude now looked at him with suspicion and fear. Then the health inspector arrived. It was a surprise inspection, conducted by a man with cold eyes and a clipboard full of checkboxes. He moved through the clinic with a grim determination, noting every minor, insignificant flaw: a crack in the floor, tile, a box of supplies stored an inch too low on a shelf, a paperwork filing error. Things that would normally warrant a simple warning were written up as serious violations. By the end of the day, a bright orange shutdown notice was slapped on the front door, the official seal a brand of failure. The clinic was closed, pending a hearing that was weeks away. The silence inside the shuttered clinic was deafening. The mismatched chairs in the waiting room sat empty. The examination rooms were sterile and still. It was a tomb. Alex sat alone in his office, in the encroaching darkness, the orange glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds, casting stripes across the floor like prison bars. He had failed. He had tried to fight the system, and the system had crushed him, without effort. He had brought this disaster upon the community, upon Sarah and Leo, upon the memory of Lily. Thorn had not just beaten him, he had proven him right. He was a fraud, a man whose touch brought only ruin. Sarah found him there, a solitary figure in the dark. The strain of the past few days had worn on her, drawing tight lines around her eyes. She had defended him fiercely to everyone, but now, in the quiet of the empty clinic, her own fear and doubt were palpable. "What do we do, Alex?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The we was a fragile thread, and he felt the sudden terrifying urge to cut it, to push her away before he could hurt her more. "There is no we," he said, his voice hollow. "This is my fault. I should never have started this. I should have stayed on my boat." "That's not true," she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. The weight of the shutdown, of the public humiliation, was too much. "Go home, Sarah," he said, turning away from her, unable to face the disappointment in her eyes. "It's over." He heard her hesitate, a sharp intake of breath, and then the soft click of the door as she left. He was alone, utterly and completely alone. The anchor he had carried for 2 years was back heavier than ever, and it was dragging him down into the cold, silent deep. He slumped into his chair, the darkness of the room, a perfect match for the darkness in his soul, and in the silence, he heard Isabella's voice, as clear as if she were standing right beside him. "You peaked this time," he believed her. He had flown too close to the sun once before and been burned. This time, he had tried to fly again, and his wings, patched together with hope and good intentions, had been torn to shreds. He thought about his boat, the Wanderer. He could sell the clinic's equipment for pennies on the dollar, pay off the lease, and just disappear, sail away until he found a place where the names Alex Sterling and Lily Miller meant nothing. It was the coward's way out, but it was the only path he could see. He had tried to build a better world, and all he had managed to do was create a bigger ruin. Despair washed over him, a cold, suffocating tide. He didn't know how long he sat there in the dark hours. Maybe the thought of giving up had taken root, a poisonous weed, choking out everything else. He was mentally drafting a letter to the lawyer, to the landlord, to Sarah, a letter of surrender. Then, the door to the clinic opened. The sliver of light illuminated 2 figures. It was Sarah, and holding her hand was Leo. The boy's face was serious, his brow furrowed with a child's solemn concern. He walked right up to Alex's desk, undeterred by the oppressive gloom. In his small hand he held a piece of paper, a crayon drawing. He held it out to Alex. It was a picture of the clinic. It was a wobbly, colorful drawing, with a huge, smiling yellow sun beaming down on it. Stick figures of a man, a woman, and a boy stood outside the door. Alex, Sarah, and Leo. Underneath, in shaky letters, Leo had written, "Our clink, we can fix it," Leo said, his voice small but certain. "I can help sweep." Alex stared at the drawing, at the pure, unwavering belief captured in wax crayon. He looked up at Sarah. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but the fear was gone, replaced by a fierce, steel-edged resolve. "He's right," she said, her voice ringing with a strength that shamed his own despair. "You didn't fail that little girl, Alex. The system did. You told me that yourself. And this," she swept her hand around the dark, silent room, "is the same thing. A corrupt, greedy man is trying to break something good because it scares him. You are trying to build a better system. Don't you dare let him win. Don't let him break this too." Her words were like a splash of ice water, a shock to his numb spirit. She wasn't just offering comfort. She was issuing a challenge. She was reminding him of the man he had started to become, not the one he had been hiding from. As if on cue, he heard noises from outside, murmuring voices. He walked to the window and pulled back the blinds. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk in front of the clinic. The construction worker he had stitched up was there, along with the elderly man with arthritis and the young mother with her now healthy baby. More and more people were arriving, the people whose lives the clinic had touched. They carried handwritten signs. "We stand with Northwood, our clinic, our community. Thorn doesn't own our health." They weren't an angry mob. They were a quiet, resolute army. Sarah had rallied them. A profound shift occurred inside him. The fight was no longer about his past, about his guilt, or about proving Isabella wrong. It was about them. It was about the defiant hope on their faces, about Leo's crayon drawing, about Sarah's unwavering belief. His personal redemption was a selfish small thing compared to that. This was their fight now, and he was the one they had chosen to lead it. The despair receded, burned away by a clean, hot fury. He turned from the window, a new light in his eyes. "Thorn wants a war," he said, his voice no longer hollow, but hard as steel. "He thinks he can win by tearing me down, but he's made a mistake. He didn't just attack me. He attacked this entire neighborhood." He went to his desk and pulled out his checkbook, the one linked to the last of his fortune. He wasn't going to spend it on lawyers to fight the shutdown notice in a rigged game. He was going to change the game entirely. "Sarah," he said, his mind racing. A plan forming with the speed and precision of a surgical procedure. "Call every news station in this city. Tell them Alex Sterling is holding a press conference. Right here. Tomorrow at noon." The next day, the sidewalk in front of the clinic was a chaotic swarm of reporters, cameras, and microphones, all drawn by the promise of a scandal. Marcus Thorn was likely watching from his penthouse office, expecting to see a broken man's final, pathetic plea. He was about to be very surprised. Alex stepped out of the clinic, not alone, but flanked by Sarah and the community members who had stood with him. He didn't look like a disgraced doctor. He looked like a leader. He walked to the podium they had set up, Leo's drawing tucked into his jacket pocket, a tangible reminder of what he was fighting for. He didn't begin by defending himself. He didn't mention the shutdown or the violations. He looked directly into the cameras, his gaze steady and unflinching. "My name is Alex Sterling," he began, his voice clear and strong, carrying over the clicks of the cameras. "And I am here today to talk about the future of healthcare in this city. Not in a boardroom, but right here, on this sidewalk, where it matters." He didn't talk about his past. He talked about their future. He laid out a vision not just for reopening the clinic, but for building something bigger, something permanent. A full-service medical center, owned and operated by the community itself, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to providing care based on need, not on the ability to pay. He used Thorn's own tactics against him, presenting data he and Sarah had been compiling for months. Data that showed the obscene profit margins of OmniHealth's ER, the number of local residents bankrupted by medical bills, the zip codes with the highest rates of preventable diseases. He painted a stark picture of a predatory system, and then he offered a clear, powerful alternative. "Mr. Thorn and OmniHealth want you to believe that what we are doing here is unsafe," Alex said, his voice rising with passion. "What is truly unsafe is a system that forces a mother to watch her child gasp for breath on a sidewalk because she can't afford an ambulance. What is unsafe is an elderly man rationing his heart medication to pay for food. That is the real public health crisis." Mr. Thorn didn't shut down this clinic because it was a danger to the community. He shut it down because it is a danger to his profits. He held up Leo's drawing for all the cameras to see. "This is our vision," he said. "A place of healing, a place of hope, a place built by us, for us. We are not asking for a handout. We are asking for a partnership. We will rebuild, and we will build something better, something that can never be shut down by a bully in a boardroom." The speech was a lightning bolt. It went viral within hours. The narrative Thorn had so carefully crafted was shattered, replaced by a story of David versus Goliath, of community versus corporation. The public outcry against OmniHealth was deafening. That afternoon, an elderly reclusive philanthropist who had grown up in the Northwood neighborhood saw the press conference on the news. He was moved not just by Alex's words, but by the determined faces of the community standing behind him. He made a phone call. By evening, the game had been irrevocably changed. A $5 million foundational grant was pledged to Alex's new project. The city council, sensing a seismic shift in public opinion, announced an immediate investigation into OmniHealth's billing practices and the health department's irregular inspection. Within a week, facing a full-blown PR catastrophe and a revolt from his own board of directors, Marcus Thorne was forced to resign. The shutdown notice on the clinic door was quietly removed. The antagonist had been vanquished, not by a legal battle, but by the undeniable power of a community united. 18 months later, Isabella sat in her minimalist, art-filled apartment, a glass of white wine in her hand. She was flipping through channels on her flat-screen television, a mindless habit after a long day of schmoozing with wealthy clients. She stopped on a local news channel broadcasting live from a grand opening ceremony. The camera panned over a beautiful new building, all clean lines of glass and warm wood. A banner unfurled across the front read, "The Lily Miller Community Medical Center." The camera zoomed in on the man at the podium. It was Alex. He looked different. The weariness she remembered was gone, replaced by a vibrant energy that seemed to emanate from him. He wore a simple suit, no tie, and he looked completely at ease, surrounded by a crowd of cheering people. He wasn't the ghost she had met for dinner, nor was he the brilliant, slightly arrogant surgeon she had once known. This was someone new, a man who seemed more solid, more grounded, more himself than ever before. She watched as he spoke, his voice filled with a quiet, confident passion. He talked about accessible care, about dignity, about the power of a community to heal itself. He thanked his staff and the hundreds of volunteers. Then he smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, and looked to the side of the stage. A lovely woman with warm, intelligent eyes stood there, holding the hand of a young boy. The woman looked at Alex with an expression of such profound love and pride that it made Isabella's breath catch in her throat. Alex reached out and took her hand, pulling her and the boy closer to him at the podium. Isabella took a slow sip of her wine, the glass suddenly cold against her fingers. She remembered her words to him on that sidewalk, the pitying, condescending finality of her pronouncement. "You peaked." She had meant it as a kindness, a way to let him off the hook for not being the man he once was. She saw now how wrong she had been. He hadn't peaked back then. That brilliant surgeon had just been the prelude. This, the man on the screen, surrounded by love and purpose, the man who had built a monument of hope from the ashes of his own pain. This was his peak, and she had the distinct, unsettling feeling that he was still climbing. After the last of the speeches and the final round of applause, Alex found his way to the roof of the new medical center. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the city. The skyline of his old life was visible in the distance, a collection of cold, glittering towers. But his gaze was fixed on the neighborhood below, on the familiar streets and rooftops of Northwood. This was his home now. Sarah and Leo came to join him, the sounds of the celebration fading below them. Leo ran to the edge of the roof, pointing out his school and the park. Sarah came to stand beside Alex, her shoulder brushing against his. For a long time they stood in comfortable silence, watching the day end. "You did it," she said softly, her voice full of wonder. He shook his head, turning to look at her. "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it." He thought about the long journey from the dusty marina to this rooftop. He had started out trying to prove Isabella wrong, trying to outrun the ghost of his own failure. But somewhere along the way, it had stopped being about him. It had become about Leo's right to breathe, about Sarah's belief in him, about a community's right to be cared for. He hadn't erased his past or the memory of Lily. Instead, he had built something that honored her, something that ensured her loss would not be in vain. He had integrated all the broken pieces of himself, the skilled surgeon, the wounded man, the quiet restorer, into a new and whole person. He reached for Sarah's hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. He looked at her, at the woman who had seen him at his lowest and had shown him the way back, not just to medicine, but to himself. He saw his future in her eyes. "I love you," he said. The words simple, true, and earned. She smiled, her eyes shining in the twilight. "I love you too." Leo ran back to them, wrapping his arms around both their legs in a fierce hug. Alex looked out at the lights, beginning to twinkle on in the neighborhood below, each one a home, a life, a story. The anchor of his guilt was gone, replaced by the steadying weight of love and purpose. He was no longer wandering. He was finally, truly home.